today I get the privilege to talk to you wonderful folk about feeder fishing, and more importantly the basics of feeder fishing and how to get the best out of your day. So if you're an advanced feeder angler, we've got loads of great videos on the Preston Innovations YouTube site that you can go and check out. This video is going to be about the principles of feeder fishing, how to do it, how to get the best out of it, tackle, bait, everything. So stay tuned, let's have a look at the gear we need and what it's all about. Wow, that's unbelievable. If only fishing was that easy, hey? So if you're going to start feeder fishing, of course the first thing you need is a rod and a reel. And if you've watched a few videos or tried to get into it, you've probably heard 10-foot rods, 11-foot rods, 12-foot rods, 13-foot distance rods. There's a lot going on there. So first of all, I want to give you a little bit of the fundamentals. You don't need millions of pounds to go out and get some great rods for feeder fishing. In our range, we've got these DuraCarp feeders. And these are the ones I'm going to focus on today. These are a reliable rod, brilliant rod, lovely action. Just because it says carp feeder doesn't mean you have to target carp. You can target anything with these rods, okay? Any sorts of fish you like, but they come at different lengths. This is a 10-foot rod. 10-foot rods are mainly for focusing on short distance casting. The basic rule when it comes to rod choice is the shorter you're fishing, the shorter your length of rod. Of course, the shorter the length of rod, the easier it is to handle, the easier it is to fish with. Everything becomes so much more easier. So this 10-foot rod is what I've chosen today because I'm only going to be fishing up to about 20 meters out. If you want to go a bit further than that, you're going to need longer rods. So just to give you a guide, I would say anything up to about 25 meters. If you're sat somewhere and you think, I'm not fishing any more than 20-25 meters, a 10-foot DuraCarp feeder is going to be the perfect rod choice for you. If you're going somewhere and you think, oh, everybody casts, they cast out into the lake, I'm going to want to be fishing 25 to say 40 meters, anything like that, a decent cast out into the lake, I would then consider looking at an 11-foot rod. Again, nice actions in these rods that can cast most types of feeder. And then if you're thinking to yourself, I'd love to get into, say, some fishing where I cast it a long way, I'm targeting a big bream, I like a longer rod, then go for the 12-foot version. Of course, like I say, once you get to a 12-foot, the rod becomes longer, a little bit more difficult to use. Of course, once you get used to it, it's absolutely fine. But if you're going to be casting a long way, don't try and do it with a short rod. So it's mainly the casting distance that affects your length of rod and the choice that you're looking for. When it comes to reels, you want something reliable. There's loads of different reels out there. I love an Extremity. An Extremity is an affordable reel that never lets me down. I go for the 520 size when I'm fishing anything on these 10, 11, 12-foot rods. I like a 520 size reel. They also do a 620 size reel, and potentially bigger size reels are out there. But for me, when I'm fishing anything with these sort of 10, 11, 12-foot rods, I love that 520 size. It does just the job without being too big in my hand. Then you have to think about what you're going to put on your reel. When you go feeder fishing, you don't need particularly light, thin lines when you've got your reel there. When you float fishing, you might use lighter lines because your line needs to cast out the float, maybe 2-3 pounds, that sort of thing. When I'm feeder fishing, rarely do I use less than 5 pound line. And today I'm fishing quite close, so I've got some 5 pound sinking feeder mono on here. If I was casting further or expecting some big carp, I'd use 6 or even 8 pound sinking feeder mono. Don't be scared. If I was only going on commercials carp fishing, I would use that 8 pound. All right, that's the sort of line I would use, something really strong, durable and reliable. So you've got to try to marry up your line, reel and rod to what you're doing in your fishing. If you do that, it gives you a massive head start. So we've got our rod sorted and we know where we're going with when it comes to rod, reel and lines. I think the next thing I'd like to think about is how I'm actually going to set the rod up, because when you're going out there and feeder fishing, you want to keep things nice and straightforward and simple. I'm going to focus first of all on a more traditional style of feeder fishing, and that involves using sort of open feeders such as these that actually clip onto the line. And we'll touch on this in a minute and type of feeders. But first of all, I want to show you the rig, because it couldn't really be much easier. And I want to keep everything nice and simple so you can get out on the bank and have a nice easy day. So first of all, we've got the line running all the way up the rod, through the quiver tip and down to the bottom. And this line, on the line, I've just literally slid onto the line here what we call a link swivel. Now this is what you're going to use to attach your feeder. So you're actually going to clip your feeder onto that link swivel. So the first job is to run one of these up onto the line. The next job for me is to fit these rubber stops on the line. Now I like 2 of these, so I've put one on, but I'm actually going to show you how to fit these stops. Popped them down here somewhere, let me grab them, there they are, perfect. So basically the stops come like this on a little piece of wire. And as you can see there on that wire, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to thread those onto the line. So I put the line through the loop in the top of the wire, and I usually give myself like 3 or 4 inches through, and then I'm actually just going to slide. So I'm just sliding here. If I hold this up for you, I'm just sliding here this rubber onto that line. All right, so just pull it through like that, and now I've got 2 rubbers like that together on the line, and that means that this swivel is going to slide down and stop on them. So because you've got relatively thick line, these swivels aren't going to move. And I tend to, when I'm fishing anything up to about 30 meters, I just have these 2 rubbers on the line. If I want to fish further out, if I want to fish like further out into the lake, then I'm usually going to need those rubbers to sit against a knot. So I'll just give you an example. Now all I'm going to do is tie a simple loop in the line. Literally, you can use a loop tie for this if you want to, but if you tie a little overhand loop in your line, trim that off, keep the line nice and safe. So if I was fishing at distance, I would bring these loops right down to the knot like this. So you can see the loops are against the knot, all right? And basically what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to not have these rubbers slip when I cast really hard. But I'm only fishing at close range today, so now I can actually move these rubbers up the line to create myself a length of line below that. So it's really easy. Honestly, all I've got on the line is this swivel and 2 rubbers, and then I've got a length of line below which I'm going to attach my hook length to. So a very nice, simple feeder rig to use. I keep my hook length stored in 6 inches, which means I can literally just fit one on. If I wanted to fish with a longer one, I'd actually just add a piece of line to that hook length really easily. Got some here today. Choose which one I'm gonna pick out of my selection there. And then the easiest way to attach your hook length is loop to loop. So all I'm gonna do is simply loop to loop. You can check out any video to watch a little simple loop to loop. So I've got a loop to loop with my hook length. So now I've got my hook length here on the line, look, and I've got my attachment here, which means I can put my feeder onto the line, whichever feeder that you choose. I'll just clip this onto the line up here, and then you can see the completed rig. There we go, that's lovely. So you can see my feeder hangs on the end, and there's my hook length hanging below. It really is a simple feeder rig, and if I want to change the length of this, which we'll talk about in a bit, all I would have to do is move these rubbers up and down the line. Dead straightforward to do, and we'll talk about why I might want to do that in a bit. So as you can see, that rig is really straightforward. Of course, The other type of feeder fishing that you might encounter or see, or you might want to try, is method feeder fishing. Now, if you're fishing with a method feeder, you would actually have your method feeder running on a stem. I've got one here ready for you. If I just show you this method feeder. So this is straightforward. This method feeder itself, basically the line goes through the method feeder and you have a bead tied to the bottom to which you attach your hook length. So you would have a method feeder running up and down the line, and you can fish with that dead straightforward. We've got some fantastic method feeder videos on the Preston Innovations website. Check those out for some detail on how to load and use the method feeder. This is more just about the fundamentals of feeder fishing today, but these method feeders, these are fantastic for carp, and I'm encouraging you, if you're going on a commercial, I would probably go with a method feeder as my starting point. It's such a brilliant feeder. All right, so the rigs are dead easy. I think we need to have a little look at the feeders. Before we cast out and get started on a little bit of fishing, I think we need to talk about feeders themselves and what sort of different types of feeder and what you're trying to achieve. You've really got to remember that when you're feeder fishing, every time you cast in with a feeder with some bait in, you're introducing some bait into your peg. So you almost have to think, what bait do I want to introduce to the fish? What do I want to give the fish to eat? And that will decide what type of feeder that you use, because the way you give the fish the bait is ultimately what dictates how you're going to catch the fish or not. So like I said, method feeder fishing, pellet feeder fishing, there's some great videos out there on that. I'm going to concentrate a little bit today on what I consider more traditional feeder fishing. So first of all, these are two traditional styles of feeder that I've got in my hand here. All right, these are what we call open-ended feeders. So you can see these two open-ended feeders, and all you need to do, or all you need to realize, is these are fantastic up to sort of 20-25 meters. When you put the bait in them, they're going to go down, they're going to sit flat on the bottom, and your bait's going to open out onto the bottom and expose itself to the fish. So the reason they're called open-end is that you can see through the feeder. So what all you do when it comes to like loading one up is you literally scoop that feeder into, say, your ground bait, give it a little gentle pinch in the end. You don't want to nip it in hard. You're almost just trying to just compact it in there. And as you can see, that feeder holds your bait in. So when you cast out, it delivers it down to the bottom, and the water pushes the bait out, and you're left with bait in and around your hook bait on the bottom. So that is the fundamentals of what you're trying to achieve with a feeder. Then you have to sort of think, how and where do I want to introduce my bait, and what do I want it to do? So for example, this feeder that I've got here is also an open-ended feeder, but this is what we would call a cage feeder. So this has got effectively holes in it. We call this a hex mesh because it's hexagon shaped mesh. And what that does is, although you can nip your bait in the feeder, obviously there is water that exposes this bait in the middle. So what you tend to get is a faster breakup of the bait in the feeder. So if you imagine you want the bait to be coming out on the way down, maybe even like, say, let's put a few maggots in there. Maybe even like if you were going to put a few maggots in the feeder, you might have like an odd maggot starting to crawl out of the holes, that sort of thing. So if you almost want to like entice the fish with something, bits breaking off everywhere, this sort of like hex mesh or cage feeder style is absolutely fantastic because it draws the fish, it allows the fish to come into the peg, smell what's going on. But often, once we get the fish there, sometimes this can almost send them a bit crazy because there's loads of bits breaking off, and that's when we tend to change to this sort of more solid style feeder that gets the bait to the bottom a bit more cleanly and almost like says, yeah, come here fish, come and eat the bait on the bottom. So it really is straightforward in the style that you're trying to choose, and basically this is how you introduce your bait into the peg. Now there is other types of feeders as well, like what we call a window feeder. This is where you've got the lead at the bottom of the feeder, and this is there because effectively when the lead is at the bottom, you can imagine this casts really straight, really accurately, because everything's at the bottom. We also do rocket style feeders that are the same. The weight is at the bottom of the feeder. You get the same sort of mesh configuration, but the weight is at the bottom of the feeder. And effectively, I use them when I'm casting a bit further. If I'm fishing, say, 30 meters and more, I like to use a feeder with the weight at the bottom. It just helps me cast a little bit more accurately. You still get the same bait release. So with a winder feeder, what you're trying to do is you're trying to go into your bait and almost like load it from the side and just very gently pushing the bait in the top like that. So the bait is effectively trapped into the feeder. It goes down to the bottom and then it breaks up the same, but it comes out of the side of the feeder rather than coming out of the openness of the holes. The only issue with this can be, obviously, you only get bait being released from one source. So it's really good if you want to put some live baits or something into your peg, but it's very nice to have that open style feeder that's attracting the fish. One thing I really need to tell you, if you're sort of thinking, whoa, there's a lot of feeders there, there's a lot of things that can confuse me, start off with these open end style feeders, fishing close, understand how these type of feeders work, and then like I've said before, there's some fantastic videos on our YouTube channel talking about different styles of feeders. It's something I've done a lot on there, so that can almost like advance you to the next level. But for now, if you understand the fundamentals of this feeder, and filling this feeder up is going to get you a long way in fishing. I think that's quite a simple little setup. I think we should cast in and do a little bit of fishing so you can actually see all this in practice. And I think that will give you a really good understanding of what's going on. So we're going to kick off the session. I'm going to put 2 red maggots on, one of my favourite ever hook baits. It's funny really, I don't tend to fish with 2 red maggots that much on the hook. Once the day gets going, I like worms and maybe a single maggot, but I've something about putting 2 red maggots on at the start. Whenever you start the session, you've got to consider there's nothing there. You need to be busy, all right? So you don't want to just be chuck it in, yeah, sit back, relax. When you get going on an initial session, it's important that you cast in regularly. I like to cast every sort of minute, 2 minutes for at least the first 15 minutes. That's why I haven't got a big feeder on. I've just got a nice little feeder on, and I'm just gonna plip, 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 almost like a little bit of noise, little bit of bait, feel my way into the day. I'm not just gonna allow myself to start fishing. So I've got my ground bait here. I've put a few, I just literally scattered a few pellets in my ground bait, and then I've got 2 or 3 other baits I can use. So first of all, I've got some chopped worms. I've got some worms there that I've just chopped up quite coarsely, little chunky pieces of worm, and I've got some live maggots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few worms into my bowl, and then I'm going to put 2 or 3 maggots into my bowl. So my bowl, if I can tip that up, it's quite hard to see, but effectively in this ground bait, I would then put a few worms like so, and then a few maggots on top of that. And then what I'm going to do is just scoop that bait into the middle of the feeder. So I'm going to put that bait into the feeder first, and then I'm going to use the ground bait in either end and just nip it in the middle. Like really, like, this isn't a case of just ramming it together. You're just trying to feel your way in. So a nice little gentle cast out to where I'm fishing. I'm only fishing like 12 meters today. And literally, there's lots of like little roach and stuff in this lake. It wouldn't even surprise me if I got a bite first cast, but I'm going to put it on the rest and I'm going to give it like a minute. So yeah, look, wow, that's unbelievable. If only fishing was that easy, hey? So we've got a fish here. What we got? Oh, a nice chunky roach, or is it even a skimmer? Look at that, a little chunky skimmer. That's lovely, that is. So got a nice little skimmer there to kick me off. All right, so there's obviously lots of fish in this lake. It's not going to take long. I haven't even cast in any bait there. That's absolutely remarkable, to be honest. But again, I'm going to do the same thing again. So obviously you can see there straight away, there's obviously a few fish. Double red maggot didn't let me down. I've got a size 16 hook on. I'm going to put those 2 maggots on, and then I'm going to repeat the process. So just a little bit of worm into my feeder and a few maggots into the ground bait like that, and I'm going to scoop it through into the middle of the feeder, gently press it in the end. If I press it too hard, it won't come out. If I press it too soft, it'll come off when I cast. So I'm literally just casting that out dead easy. And we'll talk about the cast in a minute. Let it hit the bottom. I'm feeling the line, because as the feeder sinks, effectively what happens is you can feel the tension in the line, and then you'll see I've got 2 rod rests. The first one is positioned around about 1 metre or so in front of me, and then the second one is positioned here, back here, and this is what we call a butt rest. So I've got a rest here supporting the back of the rod, and I've got a rest here supporting the front of the rod. So I can have my hands off the rod and I can clearly see what's happening on the tips. And when the tip starts bending round, obviously there's a chance there might be a fish hanging on the end. That time he got away with it. So the quiver tip is really sensitive, and when the fish is sort of pulling at the bait, you'll get little taps and dinks and movements on the tip. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the fish to almost pick up the bait and go, oh, I can't escape. And when you get that, you get the tip shaking. And when the tip shakes, it's a great indicator that you've actually hooked the fish and you can pick up and wind in. I think when you start feeder fishing, a lot of people are very keen to pick up the rod at all the indications, and it's actually only with a little bit of experience and time that you learn to understand the difference between an indication that isn't going to be a fish and an indication that will end up being a fish. Effectively, my sort of golden rule is anything that happens once, so if you get one quick movement or one slow movement, that generally doesn't tend to be a fish. Anything that sort of happens twice, maybe 2 or 3 quick movements, or as the rod's moving round, it sort of judders a little bit, they are clear signs to me that the fish has been hooked and effectively it's shaking itself. So if you use that as a really good starting point, remember, one little tap or one slow pull doesn't tend to be a fish. But if the rod pulls round a little bit quicker, and as it's pulling round you almost see it juddering, that's because the fish is swimming away with your bait and it's a bigger fish. If you see the tip moving 2 or 3 times, there's a good chance the fish has almost hooked itself, and then you're going to wind in with the fish on. So as I've got my tip there, what I don't like to do with that tip is bend it right round. If I sort of put some tension on that now, I don't want that rod, I don't want that tip to be bent right round, because if it is, it's all very tight for the fish. I actually prefer to almost put the tiniest little bend in the tip, so I know that everything's nice and tight between the feeder and the tip of the rod. But effectively, if it picks it up, I've got this really soft tip that can move. You imagine if the tip's already bent round, there's not as much scope for movement in the quiver tip, and effectively what that means is that you're not going to be able to see the bites as clearly or understand the bites as clearly. So again, another mistake that a lot of people make, they just have that tip a little bit too tight. So just bear that in mind as well. So I'm just going to put these 2 maggots on again. Why not? That seems like a good, and I'm still going to keep this sort of regular casting to begin with. A few worms in the pot, a few maggots in the feeder. Scoop that in like that, dead nice. And again, just a nice gentle cast. You'll see I'm literally just lobbing it out. Casting's something different on its own. If you're going to go and do some feeder fishing, casting's obviously very important, and being as accurate as you can do. And what I like to do when I do that is I like to pick a spot on the far bank. So today I've got a lovely bush on the far bank that I can see, and I can aim my feeder at every single time I cast out. But what it means is it'll mean that I'm building up the area in one spot, and I think we should look at that in a little bit more detail, because that is a really fundamental part of feeder fishing. So how do you know that you're going to fish in the same spot every time? I think that's like a really important thing. I like to choose my spot where I'm going to fish. I tend to cast out a couple of times before the start. Is it okay? Is there any branches on the bottom? Is there any sticks there? Is there any sort of snags there? And if I think it's okay, I decide that's where I'm going to fish. And I do that by casting my weight out and just dragging it along the bottom a little bit. But when I cast out and start fishing, In order to do that as accurately as possible, your reel will have a line clip on it. Okay, now a line clip is there to trap the line underneath it. So if I cast, I'm just going to cast this out to the clip so I can show you guys what I mean. So if you see here, this line is trapped underneath the clip on the reel, but all I've done to do that is this is the line off the reel, and then I'm literally just going to use my nail to feed the line underneath the clip. Now another way of doing it is to come over the top of the clip and wrap it around the clip so you're clipped into one space. Personally, I like to clip it using my nail because then I can simply unclip it that little bit easier, and that effectively stops the line. It traps the line in position, which means when you cast out, it can't go any further than hitting that line clip. And if you imagine that's sort of about 12 meters, wherever you want to fish, every time I cast out, my feeder's going to stop when it hits that line clip and go to the bottom in the same place. And that means I can build up the bait in the same place. I'm not just casting it out and guessing, I'm sort of using the line clip to be nice and accurate and to build bait in the same spot. So once again, a few maggots, few worms in the feeder, put them into the feeder nice and gently, gentle little squeeze in the feeder. And when I go to cast, I look at that bush that I want to cast to, trap the line on the reel with the spool off, and then literally I'm just going to use the weight of the feeder to flick it at the bush, and when it hits the clip, it'll stop in place and come back. So let's just show you that one more time because it's dead easy and it helps me build up my swim a little bit. So we'll do that again. Literally just put the worms, a few maggots, every time a little bit of bait. Got to remember, it's a little bit of bait every single time you drop in. And then when we cast out, this time I'll just hold it up for you when it hits the clip. There we go. So look, the line has stopped the feeder as it's hit the clip, and that's allowed my feeder to go down into the water. All right, so one thing a really interesting point with that is as you do that more and more, you'll get used to that feel of the feeder hitting the clip, and you can almost cushion it into the water. You don't want to whack it into the water dead hard. So you'll see when I cast, all I do is literally, as I cast out, I allow the line to hit the clip and I just position the feeder into the water really, really nicely. Let it hit the bottom. When I'm confident it's hit the bottom, I bring the rod back onto the rod rest, and then by gently turning the reel, I pick up the slack line to give that very, very, very slight bend in the tip. And then I've got my hands free to prepare my ground bait for the next one, and I'm watching the tip nice and intensely. Oh, a nice little bite there. That's a slightly better one. So, you know, bites can come as fast as that. You know, that's how quick bites can come, especially when you're fishing somewhere. Oh yeah, especially where you're fishing somewhere with some nice skimmers and that. Get my landing net for this one. So as you can see, look, lovely skimmer, picked up my double maggot there, and everything's very, very nice. Now, what I also wanted to touch on with you guys was, of course, we talked about the length of this, what we're going to call tail below the feeder. All right, so what we've got here in effect is, as this bait goes into the water, this feeder is going to come down to the bottom, and this bait falls straight down next to it. All right, there isn't any of this like coming down to the side. That would be lovely, but it doesn't tend to happen like that. The bait falls down. So I don't like to keep this length too long unless I want it to fall for longer coming down, if that makes sense. All right, and sometimes that is what I want. Sometimes I do want it to fall for longer coming down. So if I just give that a little gentle nip in there, and again, flip that out there, lovely. All right, and in my head, as the feeder hits the bottom, then that is coming down. Now, one of the things that you can do, if you think there's lots of fish there, sometimes you can shorten that length down really close to literally like 15 centimeters, something like that. But sometimes you might find that your tip's shaking a little bit, you can't quite hook the fish nicely, and actually by giving them a little bit more line, the fish get more of a chance to actually get the bait in their mouths and swim off, and you actually get a nicer bite. So there isn't really a hard and fast rule. I tend to start with about a foot, that's 30 centimeters. That's a great starting point, unless there's a restriction on the venue that you're fishing. And then you can just feel your way in. Sometimes it's better to try longer, sometimes it's better to try shorter, but you've got the option to do that with this setup that I've shown you. Oh, that was a nice little bite there, but didn't result in a fish, so that's quite interesting. Let's see my hook bait. Oh, that was actually in one's mouth, but I never hooked it, so that was disappointing. But that sometimes happens. You have to accept that that sometimes happens. And the reason I know that that bait was in a fish's mouth was because all my maggot was all mushed up and destroyed. So I'm just going to put, again, 3 or 4 maggots, few bits of worm. Now, you're probably wondering about when you want to change the size of feeder, when you might want to use a bigger feeder. And I've got a really simple rule when it comes to that. Effectively, I believe that the size of fish is what dictates your feeder size choice, because it all dictates on how fast or not you might be getting the bites. As you can see here today, I'm getting bites and indications very quickly, and there's signs of fish in the peg really fast. So if I had a big feeder on, I'd be crashing a lot of bait into the peg, almost a little bit too much and too regularly. But by fishing with a little feeder, oh, just come off there. That was a nice fish as well. Just by fishing with a little feeder, it means I can put the bait in really regularly, because I'm casting in like almost less than a minute sometimes. That's how quickly I'm casting in. But on other occasions, you might need to cast in and wait a little bit longer for those bigger fish. So if you're going to do that, you're going to need a bigger feeder. So basically, think about the fish that you might be targeting. Maybe wherever you're going fishing, people might say, oh, it's some big bream today or some carp. If you're going to be fishing for those fish, you might be fishing with a bigger feeder, say every 5 minutes you might be casting it in. If you're fishing for smaller fish like what I am, you might be fishing with a smaller feeder, casting in every minute to 90 seconds. That's why we have so many different sizes of feeders, and we have different weights of feeders, because sometimes you might want to cast a bit further, you need a heavier weight. If you're going to be casting nice and close, this feeder that I've got on today is only 15 grams, a really light feeder, because I'm only casting close. So a heavier feeder for casting further, a lighter feeder for casting close. They're the sort of fundamentals that you need to consider. There's so much going on. If you can get it nice and right, it's really easy. So just keep that in mind. Lighter feeder, casting close, smaller feeder, smaller fish. Think about those combinations and how you're going to approach things, and just take it one step at a time. If I decide I'm going to fish for some big carp here later on, I'm going to put a much bigger feeder on, I'm going to put much more bait in my feeder, and I'm going to cast it in probably every 10 minutes while I wait for a big carp to come in and eat it. I've got to obviously think about that as the day goes on, but for now, I'm having loads of bites, fishing nicely, really steadily, and trying to catch a few fish. There's been one chewing at that for a little while. Let's see if he's on. Yep, that one is on. Or did he just come off? Sometimes that happens as well. Yep, look at that, not paying attention. So there's loads of fish there. I've just got to make sure that by keeping the bait going in regularly, those fish obviously end up on my hook, and I've got to manage that really. Sometimes if I think, oh, it's getting a bit crazy down there, I might just literally fill my feeder up with just the ground bait. I might this time just ground bait, no maggots or worms, and we'll just try that, almost like trying to calm it down a little bit, few less particles down there to send them all crazy. But as you can see, there's clearly loads of fish in this venue, and I'm getting loads of bites. So I would recommend, if you want to get out feeder fishing and you want to give feeder fishing a try for the first time, try and go somewhere where you're going to get lots of bites from small fish. That's going to allow you to be nice and busy using your bait, trying to find out how to get the best from your day, and it's going to result in a really enjoyable experience, but also putting all these things I've talked about into practice so you can put more fish in your net at the end of the day.